I am Jeannette McGill. I am a corporate executive as well as board director, and most importantly, a mountaineer, a passion that has served me well for many decades now. I am South African by origin. I am located in Melbourne. However, I also spend up to about 5 months of every year in Nepal.
Now, this is not the first time you've been on the Tough Girl podcast because we're having a little chat just before. So, you first came on the Tough Girl podcast January 7th, 2021. So, we would have spoken at the end of 2020. And during that episode, we learned more about you becoming the first South African woman to summit Manaslu, the eighth highest mountain in the world. And in that episode, we talk a lot about sort of your childhood, your dreams as a little girl, wanting to climb big mountains, the lack of female role models in the 80s and 90s. You share more about the realities of climbing 8,000-meter mountains and what it's like being at altitude, climbing your first 6,000-meter peak over in Peru. We go into loads of top tips and advice as well, whether that's dealing with queues on the mountain, cold management, oxygen management, the practical information, especially regarding summiting Manaslu. And you also share like magical moments and talk about mountain leadership and mentoring. So fantastic episode. And I'll share our first episode in the show notes so that people can go and listen to that. But this episode, we are going to be focusing in on Everest. Now, Everest has been a dream of yours for over 30 years. So take us back to the Everest dream, that idea, and almost why it was almost maybe not talked about as much as it has been.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose it's almost a rhetorical question to the audience as well, is that I think we all have a one day, someday project stuffed somewhere in the back of the drawer. Do we want to complete something? Do we want to write a book? Do we want to go and do things? And I suppose ultimately, Everest was my one day, someday project. It was always on the back burner. I'll get there, maybe. And also, I had this notion that I didn't really need to climb Mount Everest. However, post our previous conversation that you already mentioned, I think as one, I was delving into the background of the pandemic, wondering about what would happen next. It came to the forefront of my mind that actually I felt this pressure to become, inverted commas, a real mountaineer. And I guess that be a real mountaineer in this modern era, that one sort of had to tick Everest off the list. And that got me thinking that actually way back in 1995, there had been this competition in South Africa to select a female member to join the already pre-selected men for the now rather famous 1996 Everest season. So in South Africa, they selected all the men and they were now looking for one woman to represent females. And this competition started where they would select 5 women to go and climb Kilimanjaro. And then the successful recipient would then be given a spot on the Everest permit, which is all rather jaded if you put the current climate around what we're doing, overprint that. But nevertheless, I looked at this application and I had a lot of experience and I'd done various things, but there was a pivotal moment where, it was this contrast between completing my university studies and embarking on a career or throwing my name in the hat for this competition. And ultimately I didn't. I tore up the application that I'd started. I tore up the newspaper report that I had been keeping on my desk, and off I went. I went and pursued my career, which I've never regretted. But at a time, I decided that, I needed to make this full circle moment and see if Everest was a realistic goal of mine. And I do think that whilst Manaslu was definitely my 8,000-meter goal, and we've spoken about that journey, in actual fact, that was sort of trying to see if my body can make it at 8,000 meters, because not everybody can get to 8,000 meters.
So coming full circle again, when did you start thinking about sort of Everest again, when did that niggle start scratching again? When you suddenly start thinking, okay, well, I want to do this. Like, as in, like, I really want to do this. And how or why did that happen? Was there another moment that happened that sort of brought it to the forefront, which is like, it's not one day or someday. I need to make this project a reality now.
Good question, because I sort of grew into the project, as it were. I think, in all honesty, started a little bit blasé after the pandemic, going, you know what, I need to do Everest. I'll add it to the list. I've got this list of mountains I'll do, and why not? Let's just add Everest to the list. During COVID and the pandemic, I had unfortunately also endured a back operation. I had L5S1 back surgery. I was also going through the throes of perimenopause at the time, but we came out of COVID and I decided that 2023 would be my Everest year. And like I said, I think a bit blasé, and also it's quite admirable to go and decide to tackle Everest 6 months after serious back surgery. But never one to turn down a challenging goal. I trained, and biggest thing that happened to me when I arrived in the mountains in 2023 is that I decided to lead a group up Mera. I was using Mera as my acclimatization strategy. And I always love introducing Nepal to people and guiding and supporting. And I thought that this would be the perfect run up to let people join me, and then I would carry on and climb Everest. Unfortunately, the downside of that is that I got quite sick. There were some members of the group that did arrive sick. And yeah, unfortunately, I then got sick and my body just didn't recover. I think it was also still recovering from the back surgery. And, I had this very serious chest infection. I got as far as Camp 2. So I did get through the icefall and get to Camp 2, but the strain and effort on my lungs, I'd already been in hospital at Kumjung before that, and ultimately I just knew that my body wasn't responding well, and it was unwise to continue. So I pulled the plug in 2023.
Difficult decision, but obviously 100% the right decision. So going home, going back to Australia, how did you regroup again and what did you change? What did you decide to do differently? And also, I suppose, going back the next year.
Yeah. So what then happened after that was that, unrequited goal, the goals sort of started making more noise in my brain. And that is when I decided that I actually want to commit to this goal, and I want to gift myself the power of a midlife, what I call sabbatical, but I suppose you can also call it a midlife crisis. Men go and buy big cars, and women go and climb big mountains, I suppose. But I actually exited my role at that stage and decided that my goal for my sabbatical was very much the training and the work to be able to go up Everest. And so I then launched into the training for the 2024 season. So I exited my role in December of 2023 and put my head down and arrived in Nepal in 2024 in a completely different headspace. I'd also made a few changes insofar as I would just do my pre-acclimatization on Mera by myself, and then I would join a team which was very small, and the aim was to keep me as healthy as possible. And so I did my rotation. That was a very big success. And then I left on my summit push. And unfortunately, two things happened. Firstly, when I was going up the Lhotse face, a piece of gear that we use called a Juma, this mechanical ascending device, actually broke. Out of complete blue, this device that I had used on many climbs before just did not work. And so I was a bit stuck for a while. And ultimately, this is a piece of gear that one just generally doesn't have two of on the mountain. It's usually a fail safe gear device, this Juma. And so that was the first thing that went wrong. And the second thing that went wrong was that I got word that unfortunately, whilst I was climbing Everest, my house had had a fire where I was staying in Australia. And the added stress of having to deal with the uncertainty, unknownness of what had happened to my place of living, what had happened to my things, just meant that it was not the right headspace and place to push into the death zone. So I got to the South Col and I sat there and I knew that the risk profile going higher really increases. And it's not only about me, it's about me being in the right headspace such that my team is safe. And so it was very disappointing for me, but I knew it was the right decision at the right time based on these things that had been going wrong, based on where we were from a headspace perspective, that quitting and turning around was the best way. So due to gear failure and a house fire, I gave up. I turned around to 2024 and left the South Col and progressed all the way down the mountain.
Progressing down the mountain after, the sort of the second attempt and, quitting after, making a very informed decision about the risks, your headspace, the risk profile, and then also just feeling that disappointment again. And I can almost imagine I'll be like, why me? What is going on? Like, oh, I suppose the frustration and that disappointment and dealing with that. How did you deal with that? How did you handle that? And how did you process it over the coming days and weeks?
I'll be honest, it was really difficult for me. I returned to Australia. I had to, with great trepidation, arrive in the town and go to the property that police had cordoned it off, waiting for my return. Made it safe as best possible. It had been open to the elements whilst I had to return to Australia, and this disappointment coupled with seeing that, my space, my things had now been destroyed, really left me sort of not in a good headspace. I had to pivot to becoming quite nomadic, using apartments and Airbnbs, and I did not have a very good July and August. That's winter in Australia, the Southern Hemisphere. And so these dark winter days, cold weather, just come from the mountain, did leave me floundering. And I did not know what was next. However, I then decided one day that I would regret if I got to 84, 85, and I was now on my stroller and I hadn't given Everest a very good next shot, I would be personally disappointed. And so, it's obviously a very resource heavy undertaking, the whole Everest journey. But I just knew that I would be disappointed if I hadn't backed myself one final time. And so I also used the upside that now I didn't have a permanent place to live. I didn't want to wallow in that disappointment. And it was about pivoting and making the best of the situation. And that provided me with massive flexibility. And I remember sitting in August into September, deciding, okay, we are now going to do Everest one last time, and this gives me the flexibility to go and train anywhere in the world. And so I remember looking at going to Scotland and doing some of the winter work there. And the other option was to go to New Zealand. And being summer, it's a lot easier to do things independently in New Zealand as well. And it was a bit closer. So it was a choice of going to Scotland, doing some things in the winter climbing over there, alternatively going to New Zealand. And that's ultimately what I chose. So I packed up and I went and had a long stay in New Zealand where I trained. I was able to do a lot more in situ mountain work as well with the quality of mountaineering in the New Zealand Alps on the South Island. And did quite a lot of gym work. We can always talk around some of those things that I adjusted. But ultimately, I decided that this was now for me. I really do think that I also had this mental journey and transition it started sort of going this pressure around wanting to be a real mountaineer because real mountaineers climb Everest to a far more personal objective. I even sort of said to myself that if your summit was guaranteed in 2025, but yet you could never ever tell anybody that you had gone up Everest, would you still do it? I think the honest answer is maybe when I started on this journey, it was far more external focused. Whereas I'll be candid and honest and self circumspect enough to know that as I progressed with the Everest goal, it became even more and more personal. And had I known that my summit could be assured, but I could not tell anybody about it, I would still have gone and arrived at the mountain. And so that's what I did. I trained in New Zealand and packed up and returned to Nepal in the spring season of 2025 and embarked on my third and final expedition.
So before we talk about that expedition, I think there's just a couple of things there. I think that's a really powerful acknowledgement when you can deeply reflect and realize that actually you've moved on from that external validation to that actually I'm a real mountaineer because not even though I haven't climbed Everest, to actually, if I do this and no one knows about it, would I still want to do it? And when you know that that answer is yes, that I think is that's just so powerful. I think there's another one which is, if you had all the money in the world, what would you go and do? Like what type of life would you be living? And it just helps to really to prioritize what your goals and your ambitions are. And you talked about the training as well. I'd like to dig into that in a bit more detail. So you mentioned obviously being in the mountains in New Zealand in the South Island and doing gym work. So what did that look like? Were you going out with another person? Was it you just spending time in the mountains day after day? Were you following like a specific coaching program, or was it more sort of ad hoc? What did that look like?
Obviously, I support other people as a mentor, so pretty well versed in setting up some training programs. But at the same time, you can't ever do these things alone. So I had effectively a bit of a squadron of support. I had my A team that I had a private WhatsApp group that I would update on and have support from a mental perspective. I had a mental coach. I also did have a physical coach. So I've always been able to use training peaks, training programs. And I will share that I did have support from an Evoke coach who specialized in 8,000-meter mountaineering. We'd had a really good conversation after the challenges of 2024. And when I decided, I just said, I just want somebody to fine tune my training model. I did believe that I was in a very good position in 2024. All my Sherpas agreed with me that had it not been for those other negative side things, I probably would have summited Everest. And I do agree with that. But I really just wanted to fine tune the training model that I had. And so, yes, I did have some coaches and this private WhatsApp group to support me. And so that meant that when I trained in New Zealand, it was doing the very top portion of the training pyramid, which is, I knew that my base had been really well established. I also went and returned to Manaslu in the fall season of 2024. So that meant that in 2024, I actually went to 8,000 meters twice, once on the South Col in the spring season, and then I summited Manaslu for a second time in the fall of 2024. So I knew that having 8,000 meters in my lungs twice in a calendar year is not something a lot of people do. And that had all given me a really firm base for my training. I think the biggest effort that I put in was a component of training called muscle endurance. And so for that, I used some of the really steep hills in New Zealand outside of Queenstown, lugging 20 kilograms, 20 liters of water, the slopes, being able to do a lot of, intense work and interval work during the week. And I also complemented that by a structured gym program. In actual fact, I probably did over 100% more gym work in the 2025 climb than I had previously. That was probably the biggest change. The reason for that is, being post perimenopause, we do know as midlife women that our muscle atrophy can be a challenge and we need to watch our muscle strength. And so I think had I been younger, maybe I wouldn't have focused on that as much, but I do think that the endurance capacity that middle-aged women have is significant. And it's about really fine tuning the engine, which is about the short, sharp interval work, heavy calories to support muscle endurance, and then the gym work. So it was partly me putting this together, and then partly me having a team, my A team, as I called them, that I could call on them as I progressed.
And I'm really intrigued by the mental coach as well. What did that involve? I mean, was that things like visualizations or specific type of mental training that you were doing or thought processes? What did that look like?
Yeah, it was just thought processes, things that could derail me. And I had sort of developed cheat sheets for myself that help me mentally. I have a mopey list, what to do if I'm feeling sad or if I'm feeling hungry. I've got this sort of checklist because I think that in these high altitude mountaineering areas, we can sometimes get sidetracked by the large teams that are now showing up on the mountain, and to just remain mentally centered in our own project and our own goals prevents us from becoming derailed or tied up in the drama and politics that's going around. That always happens, especially in the Everest season. And so just by having these cheat sheets and lists kept me exceptionally focused on what my goal was and what I had to do. I do think that I can see in some beginner mountaineers, they do get quite distracted by everything that's going on around them. And there's an element of supreme focus that we have to have in the mountains.
I really, really like that. I just from hearing you speak, I've realized that I've actually done something similar. I really like using my notes app on my phone. And what I've come to realize on my hikes is when I do this sounds a bit silly, but when I do a food shop, like if I'm going to a supermarket, sometimes I'm so mentally tired that I literally can't even think like what I want to eat. And so I actually, it sounds so simple, but I actually have written out a list of food. So whether it's just like baby tomatoes, rice crackers, get a yogurt or a protein drink in, or nuts, because sometimes you forget like, oh, peanuts or Nutella or, whatever it may be. And so before I even go into the shop, I can have a look through and then it just like reignites something in my brain. And so I love that, having the idea of lists or cheat sheets. So when you're at a certain point, it's like, oh, what should I be doing at now? It's like, no, okay, well, now is the time for me to read. Now is the time. These are my jobs I've got to do. This is my personal hygiene list of things that you have to do. I mean, I'm a big fan of lists anyway, but I really like that idea of cheat sheets and just to help keep you focused on your why. And that's actually jogged something in my memory as well. Like when I did the Appalachian Trail, I had back then there was a guidebook. It wasn't really on GPS, and in the cover of the guidebook, I wrote every single reason why I wanted to complete this challenge. And so that was also very powerful to look back on when I was having those low moments. Let's get back out to Everest. So heading out to Everest for the third time, 2025. You're in a really strong position with your A team around you, supporting you. You're really committed to that training, to that gym work, to building that muscle. You also spent time twice up at 8,000 meters. You've really put in the work. So yeah, take us back to Everest. How did the summit attend, or how did Everest go then?
Yeah, so as you correctly say, I was in very much improved condition, just adding on the final layers. I mean, I was never sure how my training was going, but then Evoke one day did share with me that they had been looking at all the Everest climbers training and what I had done, the volume that I had done, and put me in the top 10 percentile of Everest trainers. So I think that also gave me the courage to know that whilst I was really prepared in 2024, I'd now definitely taken this preparation to the next level. And obviously, I'm very grateful that it had been on the back of me deciding to dedicate this time to this project. I had decided to extend my sabbatical by the 6 months to be able to go back to the mountain in 2025. And I was in such a strong position that I decided that I was actually going to do the Everest Lhotse double. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is becomes quite important in the story from a resourcing perspective. But I was now then on an Everest permit and a Lhotse permit going to do the traverse after the Everest summit, continue and do Lhotse and then come down the mountain, and everything progressed absolutely fantastically. I went back to Mera to acclimatize. I think it's a very strong and powerful mountain to do the acclimatization on. For people listening here who are contemplating to doing Everest, I do know that quite a lot of the acclimatization does occur in Labouche. I think the technicality of Labouche means that you expend energy quite early on, whereas Mera is effectively a snow walk. That means that you aren't wasting energy on a technical climb. You're just getting your body to focus on the altitude aspects. You're not doing two things, you're just focusing on the one. And I even slept up in a tent just beneath the summit of Mera, which meant that I had slept at 6,300 meters prior to getting to Everest. So I think it's all these little things that you can do to support your Everest climb. And it's also the importance of trying to be as independent and as experienced as possible, knowing your body, knowing what you need. By joining an overly commercial outfit, often you don't have the flexibility to do what you need. And because I was an older climber, I just really wanted to be able to dial into what I knew that my body needed. So that was the one change, is I slept up just beneath the summit of Mera. And then the other thing that I did differently this time around was that I slept at Camp 3 on my rotation. Sleeping at Camp 3 is a practice that they always used to do, I suppose, previously on Everest. 5, 10, 15 years ago. It was really the norm of Everest, is that you don't go for your summit push until you have slept at Camp 3. But over the past few years, especially because we are using oxygen lower and lower, people have sort of morphed into simply touching Camp 3. But I had gone and researched and spoken to various people, and I decided that I wanted to go back to what people were doing previously and was actually sleeping at Camp 3. And I think this past season, maybe 3 or 4 of us in the end, in the whole season, actually slept at Camp 3. But by giving your body that opportunity, it's a very uncomfortable night, but being able to sleep over 7,000 meters, I think, really sets you up in a really good foundation to be able to push on the summit push. And so, yes, I then left. I went up to the South Col as I'd done previously. That was all very familiar to myself. And I then left to go up to the balcony. And that night was exceptionally windy. I'd been working with my weather forecaster. That was somebody else that was in my team. I had a bespoke weather forecaster because one of the biggest risks is around being able to get the correct weather window. And the whole challenge with the 2025 season was that the forecasters were seeing these weather windows in the forecast, and as the day appeared where things were going to calm down, the weather window was just shut out. And so the winds were a forecasting nightmare in the 2025 season. Nevertheless, I left with quite a lot of people, headed up to the balcony. And by the time we were at the balcony, the winds were extreme, probably in excess of 60 kilometers an hour, couldn't stand up properly. And the risk of this environment with these high level winds was really extreme. And we all turned around, a lot of us turned around. And as we were getting back down towards the South Col, there was another commercial outfitter who was departing quite late to then go up. And they had had a revised weather forecast that had said that the winds were going to be high in the middle of the night, but it will drop and lull a bit later in the day. And they knew this, they had this intel, and they then had a very successful summit day on the 23rd of May. But most of us had actually turned around and returned back down to the balcony. I mean, from the balcony down to the South Col. And this is the vagary of Everest. You put in all these resources and the weather just can shut you out. And there's a lot of disappointed people. And now you've used your own physical resources. It's exceptionally taxing to get to the balcony. And that's an attempt. And most people have to return, and that's what 99% of the people did that day, and their Everest expedition was over. I returned to my tent on the South Col and was just struck with absolute disappointment. It just seemed like Everest is beyond my reach. I can do anything, I can train. I've had a house fire thrown at me, I've had gear issues, I've put in the work, but maybe Everest is just simply not going to happen for me. And so there I was sitting at the South Col, sort of reviewing this trajectory, going, this is disappointing. It's not going to happen. And I did, yes, shed a tear. My main Sherpa was unfortunately sick. I had got to the balcony even quicker than my Sherpa. And he turned around and he said he has to get out of there. He went back down to Camp 2. And as you recall, that I'd started this segment off by saying that I had signed up for the Lhotse permit as well. And so the plan had been that I would summit Everest, come back down, and then that next night leave and go up Lhotse. And I had said to him, it's okay. At least I got to the balcony on Everest, but tonight I can still leave and go up Lhotse, and at least I would get 150% of my goals in the bag, because I was pretty sure that Lhotse was out of the wind. It's the couloir there's in a wind shadow, and I was going to tackle Lhotse. And so he said, fine, he'll go down to Camp 2. I was just staying with another Sherpa to effectively help resource at the South Col, and I would continue that night. Anyway, he went down to Camp 2, and on the radio, when he got to Camp 2, I woke up from a nap, and he said to me, Jeannette, Didi being the honorific for an older sister, he said to me, Didi, Everest is too important for you. I really want to see you succeed in Everest. You should go up Everest tonight again. And I said to my Sherpa, I said to him, you know, who goes up Everest 2 nights in a row? The effort and the taxing to get to the balcony. And then now he was expecting me to repeat to get to the balcony and then continue on to the summit. And he said, no, you are strong enough. You are in a really, really good position. You should go not to Lhotse. You need to go to Everest tonight. And so in this one moment of me going, it's now or never, I always said that I was not going to try another time on Everest, and that I started preparing and got myself together and went back up to the balcony and got to the balcony and then carried on for the summit. And I got to the summit later that morning.
Congratulations. The setbacks, God, when you're thinking the third time, especially, it's like, well, it's now or never. You got no control over the winds. There's nothing you can do when there's 60-mile and 60-kilometer winds blowing towards you. Do you remember, what did you feel like at the top? Was it satisfaction? Was it relief? Did you feel anything?
Oh, I felt so much, after I'd gone past the Hillary step, and I had that whole summit portion imprinted in my brain. I'd watched videos, from a visualization perspective. That was part of some of that mental training that I'd been doing. I knew what that last portion of the mountain would look like. And for me, it was an absolute surreal, glorious moment that I'd long wished for. I was on my own. I had the support Sherpa behind me. There was only the two of us. Fortunately, because I had planned to do Lhotse, that meant that I had sufficient oxygen resources to go and do Everest twice in 2 nights. And so I had that fortunate good luck at last to have those resources, which allowed me to go back. So I remember taking my last steps on my own towards the surface of the earth, and just, yes, there's a curvature of the earth there. Yes, there's this view of the mountains. It's like everybody says, but for me personally, it was such a personal goal, such something which I wanted to do for me. And ultimately, I cried. Yes, I did cry, and no, tears don't always freeze on Everest. I just cried. I was a bit of a tearful mess when my main Sherpa, we notified him who was in Camp 2. I at first couldn't even speak to him on the radio. It was only after I'd calmed down a bit. I then spoke to him on the radio and he congratulated me. But it was an emotional moment in my life and I won't ever forget it.
Massive congratulations. What a journey to get there and to be at that point. And did you say there was no one else there, obviously, apart from your Sherpa as well, just the two of you at the top?
That's correct, yes.
Wow. What a moment to be in the whole world. You're the highest person in the whole world. It's so amazing. How was how was the journey down, and did it change for you mentally? Because obviously that's just almost like half the challenge because you've still got to get back down again safely. What happened on the journey down? Did you have enough resources to go and do Lhotse, or was doing Everest that meant that you weren't able to do Lhotse as well?
Yeah, so bottom line, that's exactly what happened. The resources that I was going to be using for my Lhotse attempt were then reverted back into Everest, and that allowed me to go up twice and ultimately achieve my Everest goal. And my Sherpa was right. He had said that's actually more important to you, and he was on the money. And in retrospect, even though it was a real physical challenge to do that twice in 2 nights, you see, Lhotse is the same height effectively as the balcony. So adding on that portion from the balcony to the summit is significant. And so, whilst I was very fit, the sheer tiredness and strain that you do put on your body by being in the death zone so long. I had been at the South Col a long time as well. And so, yes, my descent, they always say that the most challenging part is the downhill. And I had trained for that. I sort of, said that I'm going to make sure that the downhill works really well. But I will just share that, it is, that stamina, you are tired. When you get tired, people don't always think the best. The support isn't as experienced. I'm very glad that I was such a good experienced mountaineer, an 8,000-meter mountaineer, that I could look after myself on the descent, because I do think that this is where some people with less experience do get challenged. The Sherpas themselves do get tired. And so for a lot of people, this is on the descent where things fall apart. And so, yes, for me, it was a exhausting challenge descending, but you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you ultimately do get down. So the challenge about the descent is very, very real. And so those people looking for tips around, the whole Everest challenge is to very much do some mental training and some physical training around your endurance to just keep you going on the downhill and to have that mental fortitude.
How was it, I suppose, afterwards? You spent years dedicated to this goal and probably huge sums of money, time, effort, dealing with setback after setback, challenge after challenge. So this has really sort of demonstrated your perseverance, your grit, your determination, that focus to not give up, to keep on going. Achieving your goal, adventure blues, or were you, I suppose, at that point of just sort of maybe satisfaction, and you didn't go into sort of a what's next sort of phase?
First, for me, it's all about relief and, what is that? The lightness of being. I definitely do feel, even still, and now, it's what, good 8, 9 months after the event, is that have this elephant off of my back. There was a definitive lightness and sense like, oh, at last, I've done it. And it was all again around me. It was just pressure that I'd put on myself to achieve this. And I've I've been so sort of happy and peaceful and at peace that I defined this goal, did it, and been much lighter for it. Yeah, I do think that everybody has a bit of a post-adventure blues. It's where you've got to recalibrate, decide what next. The Everest goal, it's been 3-year journey for me. That's a lot of time. And so either I could have just found another mountain and just kept on chugging. But I'm a mountaineer. I'll always be a mountaineer, and there will always be other mountains that I'm going to climb. But I've also purposefully said that I need to rest this calendar year, and absolutely giving me that opportunity just to rest and savor my summit. There'll be odd occasions, there things will happen, and I'll just wallow in the peace and the knowledge of where I got to. So it's a bit of both release, as well as a little bit of downness, but it's also about knowing that I will regroup and have other mountain goals down the line.
Absolutely. And have you blogged about this? Have you shared about this on social media? How can people connect with you to find out more about your mountains, about your climbing, about your mentoring? Where can they connect with you?
So I am under McGill's Mountains, and that's both on Facebook and on Instagram, as well as I do have a website as well. And so I do day by day sharing when I do take people into the outdoors. I guided a trip in Nepal in November, so you can see how a day-to-day trip with me unfolds. And then I also support people independently on their own mountain goals as well. And that information is on the website.
Fantastic. I'll include the links to your website and to your social media. But I'd love for you to have the final words of wisdom, final words of advice for other women out there who want to take on their own Everest, take on their own mountain, step outside their comfort zone. Apart from just do it, what words of advice would you like to share?
I suppose it's summed up for me in keep stretching your fear muscle. I think I'm talking on behalf of a lot of middle-aged women. We tend to let life keep on progressing. And for me, fear is a muscle. I think often in perimenopause, things that previously were easy, like mountain biking down a hillside or tackling different challenges, just inherently become harder. It's just the way it is. And I think we've got to be kind to ourselves and know that fear is a muscle. We've got to keep stretching it. And whatever your thing is in life, be it in the outdoors, be it in a boardroom, be it behind some studies, keep stretching the fear muscle such that you can go out there and achieve your one day, someday project.
Jeanette, thank you so much for coming back on the Tough Girl Podcast Extra to share more about your journey to the top of the world and summiting Mount Everest. Massive congratulations. And thank you again for providing so many top tips and awesome pieces of advice to motivate and inspire other women and girls.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hey, tribe. How are you all doing? I hope you're all keeping super well. I really hope you enjoyed that Tough Girl Podcast Extra episode with Jeannette. So the Tough Girl Podcast Extra episodes are when we go back and speak with guests that we have previously spoken to before. So at the beginning of this episode, we mentioned that we first spoke with Jeannette on January 7th, 2021. And if you're really interested in mountains, but also balancing that with a corporate career as well, this is an episode well worth listening to. Just learning more about that work-life balance. Jeannette also shares more about how she got into mountaineering, climbing her first mountain. She talks more about her love for the outdoors, working in nature, but also making big changes in her life. And she also talks about the realities of climbing 8,000 meters. There's also a lot of really practical words of advice around mountain leadership and mentoring. There's advice to motivate and inspire you to step outside your comfort zone, as well as practical advice around cold management and oxygen management and being mindful of where you are. So it's a really, really fantastic episode to go and listen to. If you are interested in mountains as well, I have a mountaineering resources page as well as a 7 summits page. And then if there is specific mountains that you're interested in, then we do sort of focus a lot on the big mountains, whether that's Denali, Aconcagua, Elbrus, Everest, etc. But I would actually like to speak to some more mountaineers who've done other mountains, done other climbs. So if you know of any incredible women who are doing different mountains, first climbs, first ascents, etc., please do let me know, because I think it'd be amazing to get their story on the Tough Girl podcast. So We have got over 800 episodes on the Tough Girl podcast. Tough Girl podcast has been running since 2015. So there's just so many amazing, wonderful, incredible stories just waiting for you to be downloaded and saved to your phone so that you can listen to wherever you are in the world. Big shout out to all the incredible patrons who are supporting the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. If you want to support the work that I do, then you can visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. I am currently in training for my next big challenge, which is going to be taking on the GR5, which runs from Holland all the way down through to Nice. It's about 2,200 kilometers, which I'm going to be taking on this summer. I'm going to be documenting and sharing the journey like I do with all of my journeys. If you're interested in learning more about some of the different hikes that I've done, whether it's Camino Adventures, UK hikes, the Appalachian Trail, Charro Trail, etc., all of that information is on the website. There is also generally 90% of the time I do manage to film vlogs and put that out on the Tough Girl YouTube channel. So if you haven't watched any of those vlogs and you want to see what it is really like, I don't sugarcoat my journeys. I try and share in the most realistic way possible. So when you undertake these different challenges, you realize it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's going to be tough moments, there's tough days, and that is okay. That is normal. It is normal to have low moments. It's normal not to have every day be an amazing day. So please do go and check it out. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe. That would be amazing. Tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast. Spread the word. That is the best way of getting these incredible women's stories out there, which is, what I'm incredibly passionate about. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%. Get after it, go for it, believe in yourself because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon.